We are broadcasting. Hey, welcome. It is the June episode seems wrong, edition episode, something like that, of vSphere Live, the currently monthly stream that we've been doing kind of at the end of the month, where people can ask questions. If you're joining us, please, if you've got questions, thoughts, all that stuff, put them out in the chat and we'll answer them live. Today's topic is security. We've been hearing a lot about security, and I'm in vSphere Technical Marketing. I'm Bob Plankers, and I do a lot of security and compliance stuff, and I'm joined by my two partners in crime. We've got Tom Stevens on the Cloud Foundation side of things. Tom, do you want to introduce yourself?
Sure. Like you said, I work with VMware Cloud Foundation mostly, but I do dabble in a little bit in the security realm, as well as several other nuances like training and whatnot as well.
Excellent. And we've got John Nicholson as well. You might recognize him from various podcasts and things. John, introduce yourself.
My name is John Nicholson. I'm a staff architect. There we go.
I think you're staff. Congratulations.
So. Yeah, thanks. I would say I from the storagey land, so storage and availability, vSAN, and so forth. Which there's no security problems in storage land, so I don't know.
No,
everything's fine.
But, security. We always think about security as like confidentiality, but the storage side of things always talks about the other two things: integrity and availability. That whole CIA triad, and so it's really important. But yeah, thanks for joining us, joining me here, guys. We're missing Ken. We normally have Ken Wernerberg on these as well. He is on vacation this week, and good for him. He is on the west coast of Canada. And Tom, are you staying cool out there? I know the west coast is a little interesting right now, temperature wise.
Yeah, it got a little bit hot over the last couple of days, but I think we're starting to cool down. So we're getting back to normal now.
Yeah,
we're just not used to that high temperature.
Oh no, the Pacific Northwest, you're not built for it. I'm in Wisconsin. We're built for the snow. We're built for the cold. Right. We're built for that sort of stuff. But when it starts to get hot, like our thick blood, we run and hide. But John, you're in Texas, right? So
Houston, where it's it's a little swampy always, but yeah, good. And it's a nice 75 right now. So.
Yeah, I don't trust air I can't see, so that sort of thing. But
yeah.
So let's get into it here, guys. And again, people out watching if you've got questions, thoughts, questions about security, compliance, even, dare I mention it? But put it out in the comments, and we'll answer them live. But we've got some stuff to talk about. Well, we're waiting for comments and people asking questions. I wanted to talk about ransomware. Ransomware is this it's this terrific boogeyman. For years, talking with Mike Foley, who did a lot of this stuff for many, many years at VMware here, talking about security. There wasn't really a single motivating factor for doing security stuff as ransomware is. And I think it's really interesting here. We've got, and the fallout from it, we've got the very public stuff, the Colonial Pipeline ransomware attacks, which ransomware is this theoretical thing that for most people, until you can't fill your car's gas tank up, that sort of thing. And so one of the things I wanted to talk about that kind of came out of that was an executive order from the President of the United States. And it mentions things like moving to the cloud, and it talks about zero trust a lot. And I was going to ask you, Tom, you do a lot of Cloud Foundation stuff. Can I buy zero trust from you? Is that something that can I hand you some cash and you give me zero trust? Or maybe that's true anyhow. You don't trust me at all, but
I think to be fair, I think there's a lot of money to be made by companies with zero trust or this new executive order that's being done. Because to be quite frank, zero trust is when it's a methodology where you don't trust anything, both internal and external. And if you've dealt with any type of security constructs, you know that there's been numerous studies that a lot of the security incidents happen mostly from internal folks.
absolutely.
Strangely enough, right? There's a high percentage of maybe not necessarily malicious, but maybe they have caused holes within the environment. They've done things that were maybe outside of the normal security practices. In either way, the result of that has been basically an internal thing. So the construct of zero trust is that you don't trust anybody on the network. You don't give them an IP address. You don't let them see anything unless the network has verified who they are and that they have access to whatever resources that are needed. So this is, strangely enough, isn't how we built the internet, right? Like when we built the internet, it was all nice because you can just take your iPad and connect in and boom, you have access to all these things from the book of faces to whatever, right? Now, however, with zero trust, and once, like you mentioned, you get a whole bunch of this awareness about ransomware and different types of attacks, it affects people's lives. And now people are starting to realize, maybe I don't want to do things like keep my Wi-Fi access point open, and maybe I want to do some other things like not write down my passwords on a sticky note on my desk, right? These type of things, or even more. I'm just giving some silly examples.
Yeah, you're saying the sticky note on the desk, though, reminded me of a credit card transaction last year where somebody promised that they would never enter they were writing down my credit card number on an index card and promised they'd never put it into a computer. I thought that was an interesting interaction. I laughed out loud at that one. So, yeah. Sorry, I cut you off. Please.
No, it reminds me of the days back, in the old school days where people would take your credit card and run it through a mimegraphic machine, and then you'd end up with the carbon copies that would be thrown in the trash that had all your information on it, right? Mm-hmm. So, yeah, I mean, I guess what I'm saying is no, or to answer your question, no, you can't just buy zero trust. I think that you can implement procedures and actions that might facilitate that, but a lot of it is also a cultural type of thing that you're going to have to deal with. You're going to have to train the people not to share information, and I think humans are by nature very sociable, and we like to share things, and sometimes that causes problems. Right?
Yeah. In fact, there's Father Prax. Thank you for commenting. Hey, if you're watching and you're joining us and you've got comments in that, put them out there. If you've got questions here, I'll put this up into the thing. There's a reason the most successful professional hackers are primarily social engineers and not code jockeys. That's dead
very
on,
true.
And, penetration testers that I know that, can get into organizations, at least back when there were offices and things like that, by dropping a USB device, dropping a USB key out in a parking lot, labeling it beach photos. Some meathead's going to put that in a computer somewhere and see what's on there, and owned is what that amounts to. What do you think, John? Zero trust, good, bad, otherwise?
Well, I don't think you can caveat it, but I'm sure there's a subscription for it. Gets back to.
I think we just lost your audio there, John.
John, are you there? Can you hear us? We can't hear you. I tried undoing your echo cancellation.
Okay, I can.
Oh, there you go. Okay, we're back, and you're not buzzing. Sorry about that, folks.
Yeah, no, I think zero trust. I would say it's a subscription, not something not a SKU you buy, but the era awesome. Where I was first introduced actually to like the zero trust model was originally, if we think about how a lot of people's networks used to be, they were rather squishy on the inside, hard on the outside. You'd have one firewall, two firewalls, three IDSs on the edge, and but if you were like just plugged in any port in the office, you just wide open VLANs everywhere, routed everywhere. I mean, you could talk straight to iSCSI initiators for some insane reason in a lot of networks.
Yeah, well, information should be free, man.
Yeah, but the kind of the eye opener to that zero trust model was shifting to where every single connection becomes secured and authenticated, initiated. And like one of the first models where we did that was working with virtual desktops. Yeah. We would say, hey, we're going to let students. I was working with a school district. We're going to let students bring their own laptops, iPads, whatever in. And you're like, do you really want the zoo of infected, disease devices on your network? Okay, we're going to PVLAN them into obscurity where they can't talk to each other. all they can do is talk to the VDI gateway, and then they hop into a virtual desktop, and then from there, okay, we assume control of that device and what that virtual desktop can talk to, and we segment and do things out. But this whole construct of treating any device plugged into the network as effectively the internet. In fact, even worse than the internet. We give it even fewer permissions to what it could talk to. That kind of opened my eyes. And you hear of some of these companies moving to where previously you'd have to access all of your applications through VPN as a common mechanism, or something like that, which gave like a blanket trust to anything that could had a VPN certificate, to instead moving to some type of SSO broker. Things like how we use Workspace ONE internally. I don't have to VPN to log into payroll. I just go to one portal and I redirect. That's been how Zero Trust, I guess, has been real in adoption for me. Is it's not just about saying I don't trust people. It's about shifting the authentication and where the edge and what you treat as the edge of the network. And frankly, I think if it's done right, it's a net win because it's actually less hassle. You're not having to trouble
interfaces. Good fences make good neighbors. So
yeah.
Well,
But on the flip side, I would also argue that I think the human beings are your weakest link, right? I mean, how many times would people use the same password for every single different thing that they had to access, right? Which kind of breaks down some of those barriers.
Well, that's the point of SSO. It's one password for everything.
SSO and multi-factor authentication.
Yeah, And I think
stops a lot of that stuff, and and that's really important. The MFA tends to be fairly easy to use, the Google Authenticator style, type in the 6-digit number sort of thing. That's pretty understandable by most people, and going that way, getting rid of those passwords, I think is going to be huge. That's a big part of this.
Well, and I think MFA has gotten a lot easier since, probably half of application access is now mobile in a lot of environments. And a lot of mobile can do bioinformatic authentication also to help speed that up. So you have something you have in terms of the device, which has the TPM has some level of attestation. And then you have, something you can combine that together.
Something you are, something something you have. Those are the three factors. And so two-factor authentication is not two things that either. You have to pick different ones, like two passwords. Yeah, I don't think so. But Zero Trust. And then, keeping systems from trusting each other so much. I like to pick on Active Directory for this because most organizations don't really think about it. They cram everything into Active Directory and they use it for authentication and authorization. So an attacker, can just, if you break into Active Directory, all of a sudden you can just add yourself to the firewall admins group and go log into the firewalls. I've heard about that one, by the way. That was that interesting story I was told.
Oh, wait, joining a firewall to Active Directory. Good God.
Yes.
We need I was actually have a blog that's in my drafts folder called the 10 stupidest things to do with storage and security. And one of them is join the, your backup target systems to the domain. There's certain things that you don't need domain compromise.
You don't want to link this stuff together like that.
Yeah.
It's not a good idea. Use the discrete management consoles, and it's just easier to upgrade too. We were talking before the show a little bit about upgrade woes. Tom and John and I here, just the complexities of upgrading and things like that, and adding in other components that are plugged in and tightly coupled to all these systems is just more headache. Don't single pane.
I think that's why some people do it, though. I mean, so for example, I've seen people who, at least in the Unix world, if you will, they write scripts and whatnot to perform whatever sysadmin tasks that they want to perform, right? But a lot of times those require elevated privileges, and just for ease of making the script, they a lot of times will use maybe a higher privilege than they need to, for example, right?
Least privileges, a big one.
But I mean, from a development standpoint, I mean, I can understand why people would. It's faster, it's easier. It gets the job done. You don't have to do a whole bunch of stuff. But you're right. It at the same time, it opens you up to a particular attack vector, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And attack vector friction, just upgrading, patching is harder, so you can't the only way to get rid of vulnerabilities is to patch. As much as people like to argue that patching, you don't need to patch, you need to patch. And we need to do it more frequently and more timely, that sort of thing.
So why do you think people don't patch?
Why do I think people don't patch? Because it's hard. They've either made it hard for themselves, or it's hard to explain, or they've it's the net result of a lot of little decisions adding up to be a lot of friction. Design things, maybe things are set up like in vSphere environments where something maybe can't vMotion. Maybe you've got some systems that aren't allowed to vMotion because it happened once and there was a little blip and the big monolithic database server didn't do so well. By the way, if that's happening to you and you're watching this, vSphere 7 does a ton of stuff to kind of rewrote vMotion. You should really look into it. There's a lot of people that are really happy with the vMotion performance on big VMs now. But
SRIOV being like another one of those that you probably don't need to use if you're using modern, smart, good NICs with lots of offloads. There's lots of things that people dig themselves into a hole because, as you said, something used to be a limitation and they stay in that hole and it becomes this like weird cargo cult of we've always done it this miserable way.
Yeah, here we've got some comments coming in. The issue we got Father Prax again. The issue I've always run into in a true zero trust model requires an order of magnitude more work to implement properly. It's the difference between everyone being a local admin to exact permissions. And I think that's exactly where you were going, Tom, right? Like that there's a balance there that people don't often pursue, let's see.
Yeah, to follow up on that, I would say that sometimes people will go through all the effort they'll try their best implement whatever they can, but then they won't maintain it. And then eventually it will get to a point where you got some guy who left the company 5 years ago that still has an account on the system, right? Or silly things like this. Again, in hindsight, it seems silly, right? But at the time, I don't think anyone did it with maliciousness. It just fell into disarray.
Yeah, it's compounding errors and just it's death by 1,000 cuts is what it amounts to, So here, let's see. You with the hat, the sound coming. Yeah, sorry about if your comment. If you think John's sound is bad, we're trying to figure that out. I toggle the echo cancellation on the platform a little bit. You buzz once in a while, John. No big deal. We've been dealing with Anthony. We've got Anthony out here watching. I've seen guest and prod networks that were all on the same /8. 100% trust in a K-12. Yes, well, and that speaks to like it's just easier and it works. You got it set up and it worked, and it's fine. Like 15 years later, yeah, whatever, So
well, but you mentioned school networks. I know Bob's come from education in the past. Everyone can do everything right if you're greenfield today, but a lot of these networks, these things have zombied on for 20, 30 years, and some of the sins of the past here, they weren't that big of a deal 20 years ago, and legitimately some of this stuff is just zombied on. I've seen people using public, they had their own /22 and they're using public IP addresses on incredibly sensitive stuff, which I guess you can do. NAT is not a replacement for firewalls, but it was just a really weird thing. And I said, well, why do you do this? And they were like, well, we've been doing this for decades. We literally own their own network. And you end up with all kinds of stuff that if you look at the time and the complexity to dig yourself out of that hole that you've made potentially decades ago, where you got members of the help desk staff who these design decisions predate their birth. We're starting to we're getting Ethernet networks that actually predate the help desk staff. So.
Yeah.
Well, I think some cases the environment has changed as well, right? So, for example, back when I first got involved with computers, people didn't have the knowledge on, say, how to break in. It was something that was handed down from person to person, or you had to go learn it yourself, that type of thing. Now, I think it's a lot easier with a 5-minute search on Google to find some script kiddie website and then just download it and boom. Like even the ransomware that you were talking about earlier, there's literally dev kits that will go and create this.
Absolutely.
You don't have to know about the computers or the networks or anything else in order to implement these. You can just whip one out, right? After paying a few $100s. So to your point, John, I think back in the day when people first set up these networks for, say, the education groups and everything else, the kids, they might have had to deal with 5 kids or whatever that were into it. We're talking
and
20 years ago.
into it
but
to help as well.
Yeah, but now I think you have a level of intelligence, or at least accessibility for even kids, right? They can go and cause some pretty severe damage.
Yeah, and we can't change the domain admin password from teacher123 because God knows what all service accounts it's powering. So
took a long time to train everyone.
Yeah. Well, yeah. So what do you do about it? I guess this is going to be one of my questions here. If you could pick a couple of things to work on right now, you've got one of these environments, you've got something that you've inherited from someone else. The last VMworld, live VMworld. Oh, I miss live VMworld. I ended up talking to some folks that had inherited environments from people, and they didn't know quite where to start. Where would you start? John, why don't we start with you? What would you do to, if you had one of these situations, what would you look at first?
So I'd identify where I'm going to draw the line going forward and say, okay, every new vendor that comes in has to support SAML. Every new vendor, that's going to come in, we're going to have micro-segmentation of. Every new application, every new contractor or user that account is created is going to be set up with an auto disable in 365 days. Use that field in AD. I'm going to let's just stop digging new holes. Now, I'm not saying we do the classic mistake of then point at everything that existed before that and say, this is legacy IT, and it's this, coverall and excuse for terrible, let's call it what it is, toxic IT behaviors. But those applications will eventually die or need to be migrated or updated, and then we can enforce the new model.
Yeah.
I mean, people love talking about how we're going to brownfield solve every problem, but let's just stop making new problems and identify, okay, we've purchased an SSO portal solution. Any new SaaS application we buy must integrate, or we're refusing the bid.
Yep. I like that. Tom, what about you? You've got one of these environments. What would you look at first?
So just as a side note, I think what John was mentioning falls right in line with some of the subparagraphs that Biden announced in his cybersecurity executive order. In fact, I think there's one that he's actually trying to do exactly what John was saying. So I think John is spot on. I guess if I were to follow up to that, honestly, I would say pick one thing and try to do it well. I've seen a lot of companies, a lot of people that they get overwhelmed with the amount of things that they know that need to happen, right? And in some cases, especially if you're a security professional or whatnot, it's hard to get buy-in from all these different groups and organizations and change how they've done business for months, years, right? So in some cases, I think what the best advice I could give someone is pick your battles, right? Find something that would have the greatest impact, or maybe the something that's the most severe, whatever the case may be, and then fix that, right? Just fix that one thing and put all your energy into getting that done and getting the buy off from other companies or other business owners. Outside of that, then move to the next one and keep going. And I agree with John as well when he said, don't create more issues, right?
Yeah, quit digging the hole,
Yeah, and there's certain things that you can do. Like, for example, just the other day, someone sent me a link to Shodan.io.
Oh, yeah, Shodan.
SHODAN.io. You can literally go on to that website and you can type in, say, vCenter, right? And you'll see a list of all of the vCenter servers that people have put out on the internet. Like, if your server is one of those systems, you should probably go and take a look at your
should rethink some of your decisions. Yes.
Right. But anyway, so I guess
too, there's iDRAX and ILOs out there. You can use that to search for all sorts of stuff that probably should not be visible to, and it's a little scary.
Totally.
Well,
So
and,
I guess my thing was just pick one thing and then fix that, move on.
well, and the key thing about about enforcing that limit on the new apps is you can attach the budget and the cost and the overhead, the net new deployments. Going to someone who has a 15-year-old application that 4 people use and say, hey, we're going to double the cost of this application to add all this licensing and wrap this or do this right or add the OpEx. That's really hard to do, but it's really easy to say, no new apps unless they're done right.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and why I like talking with the two of you, we've got the technical side of things, and we've got Tom, you keep talking about all this people and process. In security, that's the people are such a big thing. Training and keeping people making decisions well. We were talking right at the beginning about security being kind of a process and a way of thinking. Bruce Schneier, the American cryptographer, actually has a blog post from the year 2000 about how security isn't a product necessarily. It's not a product by itself. It's a process. It's a way of thinking and all that stuff. And I think we need to think about that more. And to that point, I agree. Both of you are absolutely right. Quit digging the holes, pick a point and move forward with better practices. But patching, being able to respond quickly when you hear that, any system, not just vSphere, when you hear that there's a vulnerability in vSphere or something like that, that'll happen. We're software, it happens. But, in Windows, in Linux, any of that stuff, when there's a vulnerability that comes out, being able to respond to it inside of 90 days, this is, you should be able to respond to it right away. And if you can't, you need to think about why you can't. Is it a people problem? Do your change managers not understand? Like vCenter Server, patching vCenter Server should be really easy because taking out vCenter Server doesn't take out workloads. But in my experience, it became pretty clear that change managers don't understand that rebooting vCenter Server doesn't take out all the workloads. And so you just got to explain it to them. You got to explain that, hey, if you're going to do a rolling restart of a vSphere cluster, you can do that and all the workloads stay up. Probably if you don't have anything that doesn't vMotion or whatever, there's some gotchas there. But
the traditional ITIL playbook says we need to have scheduled maintenance windows no matter how much,
Well, and to play devil's advocate for a second, I would say that sometimes I can understand where people don't want to patch immediately because what they're doing is they're evaluating risk, right?
Yeah,
meaning they're saying, okay, so if I have to go and patch this system, what things that I not know of that can cause a problem after I've patched this, right?
Yeah,
or would it affect my interoperability with other applications or whatnot, as compared to the risk that this attack would be, for example, used? Have we tested it? Have you tested it with this application? So I can understand how people are a little bit hesitant at times, right?
Oh yeah, I get it completely. And I've been burned by applying a patch and discovering that like all of a sudden I can't accept new, certificates or something's wrong, and that happens from time to time. But, but being able to do it, the lag there between filing a change for it and then having the change approved that's time that ransomware and ransomware gangs, cyber criminals can use to attack your infrastructure from the inside, and that's the thing about all of this stuff and the zero trust, and that we have to assume that the attackers are already on the inside. These ideas that our networks are a castle, we've got a moat around them. We've got a moat and we've got big walls, but once you're inside the castle, you can do whatever the heck you want. And we need our environments to be more. If we've got an environment like that, we need to assume that there's an attacker already inside that we don't know about because, they've clicked on something they probably shouldn't have clicked on, or left a password written on their desktop or something like that. And so that changes the mindset about patching a little bit too. So
I'm curious. I don't know if you've seen any numbers on this, but I'm curious on what the actual numbers are. So, I mean, for example, I know some companies who have gotten hit by ransomware, they have insurance, and the insurance just pays off the ransomware, and they either recover from backups or they get the key, whatever the case may be, right, for them, and they move on. Now, they might change some of their processes as a result of that, but for the most part, because they don't want to impact the business, right, they'll try to keep it quiet, and they won't announce it, right?
Yep.
So I guess what I'm asking is do you know of any numbers that would compare the cost of, say, paying a ransom, let's say 3 million, 5 million, whatever the case it is, as opposed to spending how much money that you need to actually fix your processes and the systems inside?
I would argue the ransoms. So the first ransom is probably cheaper for large organizations, just because. Yeah, $3 million, and you've been a complete gong show of security for the past 10 years. Like, and you're a Fortune 5,000. Like, yeah, you probably came out ahead. The problem is it's not the first ransom; it's the next ransom and the subsequent ransoms that you're looking at. Yeah, there's some reputational damage, but I think Target has proven that you can get hacked and your stock price, and Home Depot and others, and your stock price does just fine. You know, after everyone had to get new credit cards, we're all annoyed, but you know, where else am I going to go to buy a basketball right now? You know, they're right there. So,
well, yeah, you know,
I think it's a longer term thing of it's after the first one hits, you start looking at like, man, if this becomes a yearly expense, this is going to become a problem.
So I was talking about this yesterday. In fact, there's some articles out there. It came out a couple of weeks ago. I want to say that the stat that 80% of organizations that pay the ransom get hacked immediately afterwards, basically get hacked again, because one, you're dealing with criminals, you know, like no honor among thieves sort of thing, you know, and but they know you're wide open, and they know that you're gonna pay. So you know, there's that. The thing about paying a ransom is, what are you getting from it? You know, like you ostensibly you get access to decrypt all of your stuff, but in many cases, it's been reported that the decryptor doesn't work. I mean, look at Colonial Pipeline. They ended up restoring from their own backups because the decryptor wasn't working or wasn't working fast enough. And so they ended up just restoring from their backups anyhow. And so they paid the ransom for what, you know? And then, you know, paying the ransom, does that, you know, the whole argument about encouraging ransomware and encouraging this sort of thing by paying them off. There's that. You know, and there's and the last thing that's sort of stunning when people hear about it and see it in progress. Hopefully the people watching this, you all will never experience any of this stuff because you've got your security act together. But that ransomware gangs will exfiltrate data from a customer or from their victim about the victim's customers, and then go and blackmail the victim's customers, and regardless of whether you paid the ransom or not. And that is kind of interesting. That's you know, that data exfiltration, that they're stealing your data, not just encrypting it in place, but they're also getting it out of your network. You know, so being able to watch for that sort of stuff, being able to watch being able to keep that exfiltration under control, that sort of thing, is really important.
So John brought up an interesting point about certain people who got hacked and having to replace credit cards and things like that. And not to pick on them, but that particular customer, but there's lots of, this happens all the time, right? And so people sign up for, I don't know, how many websites and accounts do you think you have out there on a given time, right? Like,
that's why I try to use a random password, so that it's, because
that auto-generated password for every site for my password. I don't know any of my passwords. Like,
totally, but I'm just saying, like, you probably have accounts with, I don't know, at least 50 other companies, right? Everything from a department store to a movie streaming service, whatever the case may be, right? And you're right. I mean, at some point, these people can just gain more and more information about you. They'll get your security questions. They'll, you know, get your address, your employment history, and I guess there's something to be said about you need to have a little bit of personal awareness,
Operational hygiene.
about what information you're giving to these other people, because and not just from a corporate standpoint, but more from a personal standpoint, right?
This is one of my favorite things for answering those security questions. DinoPass. It's a password generator for kids, and I use it all the time for generating answers to security questions. What city was I born in? Funny Winter 13. Thanks for asking. That sort of thing. But just having a little bit of hygiene there, and I use DinoPass actually because I got caught having to tell my cell phone provider once. I had a long string of random characters in there for the answer to, where I was born or my mother's maiden name or something like that. And I ended up reading the whole 64 character blob to them once over the phone. That was a blast. It's much easier to say Funny Winter 13 than it is dealing with that. But we got a comment, Father Prax. Thank you for participating here. And folks, if you've got questions, comments, thoughts, put them out in the chat. Thanks for joining us here. We're here to answer questions as well. We're talking until you have a question or a comment. But Father Prax here also has a comment, about the paying the ransom. That this is something I was going to say, that insurance companies were probably fine with the whole ransomware thing when it wasn't happening as much. Now that ransomware is up something like 480% this year, they're probably thinking twice about this sort of thing, and they'll probably actually have standards for that. And and that's interesting. Companies really need to think about that, and really need to think about what the trade-off is. As Tom, as you were putting it, you guys were talking about the cost of actually fixing things versus the cost of insurance and that. And as that math changes, the responses will change as well. So let's see. What else did we want to talk about here? I wanted to talk about bad ideas in computer security. I guess have we exhausted the topic of doing what would we do designing? Let's go back to designing for security. We talked about having some standards moving forward, doing better moving forward, and then working on retrofitting things. Don't just write it all off. Talked about people in process, doing things like that. Had some good counterpoint about patching. What else? What else is there, Tom? What else should people be doing to protect themselves?
So, when I think about security, and this might be a little odd for some people, but I also come from a availability background as well, right? So I look at it as I break it up into chunks. Me personally, first of all, is physical security, right?
Yeah.
And I know a lot of people have things in colos and whatnot, but I've seen very we'll call them silly things that can cause a big problem. Like, for example, at one point, the state of California decided that it was in their best interest to outlaw certain fire suppression agents in their data centers, right?
Halon.
So, yeah, Halon. And I know that some of the data centers that I'd go to, they actually were forced to put in water sprinklers, right? Okay. I get the reasoning and the logic, but from a security standpoint, right? If someone pulls the fire alarm, you don't want all your systems to go down just because you have some disgruntled employee who just got fired and pulls the alarm on his way out the door, right? There's physical security, and I think that's one bucket, right? From there, then we go into what I would call it more hardware security, right? Like you mentioned, people putting their iDRACs on a publicly accessible network, these type of things, right?
Yeah.
And even to the point of, for example, allowing your servers in the racks to have USB access, right?
Oh, that's a great point. Yeah. What are people going to do with that USB access? What do you really need that?
Right. And especially when you're in a colo where, granted, you might have a cage, but well, let's be honest, the locks are not super high security in a lot of cases, and it's not like you can't put your fingers through some of those cages and insert something. So my point being is that you if you're really going to go for the zero trust, you would start at the basics, right?
Yeah.
Then we have software, and unfortunately, I will say this: I work for a software company, and there will always be bugs, right? There'll always be something that comes up, and so to your point, you can patch, but just keep in mind that you're going to have to patch frequently and a lot, and it's not just, oh, I patched one time and now I'm perfectly good. There's a lot of times where I find problems, at least within an environment. People do things to make their life easier, and they're not, again, they don't intend to cause problems or something like this. They're just trying to get the ease of use that they want, right? And for that, what will end up happening is they won't follow some best practices. They'll actually create more holes, things like this. And in fact, this would probably be a good time to mention, don't we have some compliance documentation out there?
We do, like compliance. So we've got hardening guides for the VMware stuff. Clearly, we've got hardening guides. So if you want to know how to go through and harden, we've been doing a lot of great work to harden vSphere and our products by default. But some of that stuff's a judgment call. We can't harden it because it depends on your environment and things like that. But we've got guidance about that. core.vmware.com/security. Here, let me put that up here. But vmware.com/security. If I could type, geez.
Well, and just to finish off what I was saying, that once you get the software, I think the other component, and I've been mentioning this pretty much, is the people, right? And you're going to have to get the people on board with this, and that's in all honesty, that's probably going to be the hardest thing, right? Because you can patch something, you can disable a USB thing, you can set up standards for access control and these type of things.
You have to get the
people to actually not hold the door open for someone, or I mean, it's down to those type of things that you have to infuse within the culture of your company.
Yeah, and make it acceptable, like we normalize the idea of wearing masks, for example, over the last couple of years or the last year here or whatever. Normalize the idea of a little bit of pressure in your organizations to, peer pressure can be, people always say, talk about bullying and peer pressure and things like that as bad things, but peer pressure can actually do some good too if it's applied well. Normalize the idea of making bad security decisions visible, but maybe avoid the blame. I like the blameless sort of cultures where you can just correct bad behavior and we just move forward.
So you're saying don't put out a report that says the reason why we're paying $3 million is because Bob clicked on an email.
That John Nicholson guy and his hat, did something wrong, no, and it's just, that's why phishing tests exist within organizations. People need to practice being assertive about saying no, I think in general, but saying no, like, this looks like spam, I'm not going to open this, this looks too good to be true, that sort of thing. And just let people practice, give them a safe environment, and then just start turning the knob, and turn it up a little bit over time. So,
and culturally, I mean, that's really nice. Because Bob sends me long-winded emails with a bunch of links and like, this is probably phishing. I'm just going to delete this. But the kind of rounding that out.
I think his mic is still acting up a little bit. Did it get fixed?
Maybe.
Oh, there we go.
All right. So the one thing I would say is just think about your ransomware scenario. Think about the recovery.
Yeah.
Think about what that's going to look like. A good disaster recovery plan is actually pretty much the same thing as a good ransomware recovery plan. Mm-hmm. And that's going to mean you're going to have hurricane recovery plan data too, that's immutable and protected and isolated.
Yeah, being able to having good backups, being able to restore, disaster recovery as a service. We're gonna be talking a lot about that in the future here. Being able to restore the cloud, being able to, even if you get run over by a hurricane, ransomware, like you said, it all kind of looks the same to a good DR plan. Some of the specifics change, but being able to be prepared for this stuff is really important. There's a reason.
I always find people building the DR plan to be kind of a fun activity, because normally, for example, if I've gone into a customer and I'm trying to help them with a DR plan of some sort, normally it starts off with, okay, what's important to you, right?
Yeah.
And then, of course, the first answer is, well, everything's important. And then so you show them the cost that's going to incur with replication and storage and additional sites and all this other happy stuff. And then suddenly you go through this process where they're like, well, okay, maybe this isn't important. And they start whittling down things, right? But to your point, I think that it's not just having a plan, but you need to have a good plan as well, right? So in other words, if you're going to have a DR scenario, you should test it out once in a while. You should actually verify that you can continue business. And it's not just about the fact that you have a rack of tapes somewhere in Iron Mountain or something like this, right? Like, you actually have to go and be prepared to use this. How quickly can you actually recover?
Yeah, can you recover? Even just a tabletop exercise. Where I worked for many years, we started doing tabletop exercises for this stuff, just to start with, and you learn a lot, about the assumptions that you make. Even if you make the assumption that our old data center is gone, anything that was in that data center can't be touched. It's gone. It's a smoking crater, whatever. What do we need to rebuild? And that, thinking through that pays dividends. This is another argument, though, for me, for patching. One of the things that happened when we started doing more regular patching, and I wanted to mention something earlier. I think it was John that mentioned the ITIL framework. That ITIL has got this idea of changes, types of changes, and there's an emergency change, which there's a standard change which you use for pretty much everything. There's there's 3 different types of changes: emergency, standard, and I think standard change is actually the normal one, the lowest grade one. Should be repeatable, documentable, that sort of thing. Emergency change, the risk of not doing it, the risk of the effect of not doing it is much greater than anything else. You should do the emergency change. And I'm sorry, there's a normal change in the middle. And the normal change in the middle is where everything gets caught. And patching shouldn't be a normal change. Like maybe service packs or something like that, but all of the stuff is rolled up with security stuff now. And security should either be an emergency change or a standard change. It should be well documented and be able to be applied pretty much any time. In theory, I understand testing and things like that, but or it's an emergency change, a critical update, that sort of thing. But I digress. I've lost my train of thought here. In fact, what was I talking about?
Well, I did. I think I kind of cut you off. You're going to show about the compliance stuff.
We were going to talk a little bit about compliance stuff. I'll think of what I was going to say before. My life is a giant tangent machine, anyhow. Here, I was going to say this. Let me see if I can. So I don't. Can I promote here? Let me go back here. We're still kind of getting the hang of this new platform, the StreamYard platform. So here, we got DinoPass here. Yeah, I think I can do. Can I do the sharing? Oh no, I can't. So, well, whatever. core.vmware.com/security. I'll put it up on my. I'll put it up on a Word doc here. Hey, I've got this chat thing. I could put it in there too. But designing for here. I'll put it out in the chat. There we go. Designing for security, designing for compliance. If you do good security, compliance and security are related. I like talking about compliance because they're related, but one is a business requirement. and one is not. Compliance is a business requirement. Compliance gets you the ability to take credit cards or help patients or run a nuclear power plant. And security keeps the bad stuff off your networks and contains it when they're in your networks. And security is an ongoing thing, whereas a compliance audit happens periodically, and it's done when you pass. And so people misunderstand that. They often conflate compliance and security. They conflate it. And it's really important you understand why you're doing either one of them, because especially the controls, the recommendations for meeting PCI requirements, for example, the PCI DSS, often look the same as like the security hardening guides that we have out there, but the motivations are a lot different. John, what do you think? Compliance, awesome. Security, less awesome.
Compliance is something that you at least minimum baseline. So compliance helps identify, I guess, a common baseline for an industry or statement, but it's not the end of security. There's a lot of people that I've accused over the years of getting an A in compliance and an F in security.
Yeah, well, look at all the breaches that happened. Those people passed audits. So
they had good logs that explained how they got breached, because that was, a lot of compliance, maybe making sure we can watch. We have observability to watch getting hacked. We have logs so we can look back and see how we were hacked.
Hey, can I stop you for just a second? You reminded me of something. Design point, two things. Design point, I was going to mention earlier, don't connect your DR site to your primary site if you want to fail over to your DR site and not have it suffer the same consequences if it's an attack. 1. And 2, please don't put your log collectors, your log insights, and all that sort of stuff inside of your infrastructure where it can be encrypted along with there's a ransomware attack. We've seen that one as well, where we can't figure out quite what happened because the thing that helps us figure out what happened actually got encrypted as well.
Well, and that's a benefit of remember, you can always chain syslog systems into a CM, and there's a lot of good systems that we offer one, but there's other vendors in the space who will do that log collector in the sky that's SaaS based, sits in immutable buckets in an object storage somewhere. And so that way, there's some benefits to that at scale, because if you start trying to really, really scale large scale retention of this stuff, it's just from a storage, it's a pain in the ass to manage. But the other thing also is if you shift to that immutable SaaS based, log intelligence or the like type system, then you get in a situation while your entire data center is on fire, you've got an idea of where the spark was.
So you're saying you shouldn't put your key management system on vSAN?
I've found a lot of key management systems to be so obtuse. I would like to think the hackers share my passion for just saying I give up and
if you break in here, please fix my architectural problems. Thank you. We've got a comment from Anthony out here, I believe still in Wisconsin with me here. Though it's been a while, I think it's been a while since anybody's seen any other humans. Environment documentation, having it external, printed out. These dead trees serve a purpose sometimes. Printed out, hanging on the wall. That's my old job. We had a problem where we had really nice configuration management databases and all this stuff to tell us what was in our data center. But what happens when it's all off? And so we were thinking up these complicated ideas. Well, we could have a laptop on a UPS that had an exported copy of the CMDB. And eventually somebody, I don't know if it was me or somebody else, but somebody just, why don't we print it out and just clip it we had metal doors. Why don't we just put it on a magnetic clip and just hang it on the door, and problem solved. In fact, during an outage, we actually decided we needed 3 copies of that. And so the next time we printed it, we just made 3 copies of it. That way the leads for the incident response could each have their own,
I think that to add to that, I think a lot of times people forget about, again, the human factor in all these things. So for example, I worked with a company that had a data center in one of the buildings that got hit in 9/11. Their backup data center was in the other tower, right? And this particular company had more backups, right? But the problem was, at least for that particular situation, is they lost a lot of people. They couldn't get in contact with the admins who managed the environment. So even though they had another backup system, the processes and the procedures that they had to follow, it took them time to actually realize how to go get that information and whatnot. So to your point, being able to have that information easily accessible and even in a hard copy is not a bad idea sometimes.
No, not at all. That's a great, and Anthony makes a great point. Like having this documentation, having the ability, having it stored somewhere, having it external, all this stuff, keep it in your DR site as well. And yeah, your point, I chuckled, like the DR site is usually not considered to be a DR site if it's that close physically. I mean, 9/11 was unprecedented attack, never seen that one quite before, but we
have hurricanes that have no problem flooding two buildings across the street from each other. Like I've seen that DR plan fail. So,
well, yeah, a hurricane across the street from each other. I mean, your hurricanes are also pretty
my
wide,
DR site, I always recommended as a text, and I'm like, let's put the DR, like stretch clustering was always just kind of like, okay, I guess that's cute, but the hurricane or tornado will knock out everything within 50 miles potentially. So I always just said, let's put it in Arizona or Nevada, because the federal disasters, they're really boring. It's a reasonable flight. There's, Phoenix is a nice town to go hang out in. There's good dinner. So
yeah. Can be a little warm at times, but yeah, whatever.
I mean, nowadays, obviously, there's other options. There's a million DR as a service options. VMware, we have our own solutions here, but there's also, in Call Island, there's all these different players in that space who can set you up with SRM and replicate UM and things like that. And I think, it used to be some of this of why people's DR plans were that building across the street, or they did these really kind of half-baked things, was it came back to cost and economics of managing that other site. But I think you've got a lot of options, frankly, because of the DRAS, DR as a service.
Oh yeah,
offerings.
Well, just looking at the DRAS stuff that we've got, formerly Datrium and stuff like that, the ability to use the cloud too as a recovery point for a lot of that stuff, and the flexibility, the elasticity of the cloud, the fact that you can not pay for a lot of infrastructure sitting there in a data center somewhere, but when you need it, you can go big fairly fast. That's a really empowering sort of thing. We're kind of wrapping up here. We've got Father Prax asking a question. Many tools out there, including VMware. Hey, are you calling us tools, man? Come on. I joke. Have security best practice documents. However, they don't ship enabled because initial config is hard to do in a secure environment. Should vendors be changing and follow up how they do their initial deployments to allow it to start following best security practices? Well, this is actually something we're looking at right now. I can speak for VMware. At the vSphere level, we're really looking. We're taking a very hard look right now as we look forward in our roadmap. What is out there? We've got a lot of hardening guidance that's out there that recommends a lot of stuff, but turns out like for hardening a VM, there's only really 6 things that need to get set at this point that aren't set by default. And four of them we can change the product defaults, and we're looking at doing that, So why isn't it secure out of the box? Well, part of that is because ideas have changed over the years, and so correcting that. And then 2 of them we can't really set because there's functionality. You need to make a call about functionality, like disabling 3D rendering. For most server operating systems, don't care. Like we can probably. It's probably safe for most people to do that, but it's an operating system thing. It's potentially a compatibility thing, and so we need to be careful about that sort of thing. But we agree with you. The being able to do this stuff out of the box is really important, and having the flexibility to shut the security controls off is nice too, because applications sometimes can't support that. I often joke with compliance. No audit and no compliance effort ever survive contact with an application. And so having flexibility there is really important. But really trying to do that, improve the defaults
Well, we mentioned earlier in this session about how there was these recent executive orders that came out that were as a result of the SolarWinds hacks and the Colonial Pipeline hacks, if you will, right? Now, granted, we're talking about the federal government here, and so that's going to move probably as fast as molasses on a cold day. But if they do
start somewhere,
if they do start this, then I think what you'll see is a lot of vendors who sell to the federal government. They'll have to change some of their practices, and over time, again, this will take, in my opinion, it'll take several years to even realize. But I think what you'll see is over time that will force companies to implement more stringent security controls, and just as a matter of default, because they want to sell to the federal government, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
So,
and I like that it's a starting point. That's what I saw the executive order as. Maybe not something that'll affect change in the 60 days that it lists there, but gets people headed down a better path. So we're pretty much at time here. We've been an hour. We've had some good conversations here. Any final thoughts, Tom? Why don't we start with you? Final thoughts here. Security, compliance.
I think as we've talked about this, there's so many different aspects to security it's kind of overwhelming for a lot of people. And, again, there's just so many different assets that you need to be concerned about. And again, the people and everything else. Again, I go back to what I was saying earlier. I think really what you kind of need to do is just find one thing and just fix that one thing and then move on. Because otherwise, I think you'll just drive yourself crazy or paranoid trying to solve everything.
Yep, and that's true. That's actually a really good point that we haven't talked about, is that security is always a trade-off. There's such a thing as too much security as well. You can kind of drive yourself nuts with a lot of the going crazy, turning it all on, turning it all up to 11. No, great points. John, close us out here, man. What would your final thoughts on security and all of this mess?
Test your backups, test your recovery. Make sure you can actually recover, and make sure that infrastructure required to do that isn't joined to your domain. That's all I got.
Oh, good point, actually. Yes, that zero trust applies to backups too. You don't want your attackers to be able to delete or corrupt your backups. So. Excellent. Well, thank you all. We've had quite a number of people joining in and contributing. Thank you to everyone who has commented. If you're watching this after the fact, we appreciate you. Well, heck, if you're watching now, we appreciate you as well. It's nice. Yeah, it's nice to do these things and have an audience. Thank you for everything. Thanks for being our customers, and thanks to John and Tom here for joining me on this adventure. I believe the next one of these is going to be the third week in July. I think like the 22nd or something. And so keep an eye out for that. We announce them a few days ahead of time. But and that one will be on AI and ML. We'll be talking about the artificial intelligence that's taking over the world and what we're doing to enable that sort of thing. So cool. Well, thank you very much and take care. Stay safe, folks.